Okay, so this is part 2 from last week's lesson, which was dealing with smart objects. And I had quickly demonstrated the adjustments that one would need to make to this tequila bottle. So what I've done is, just for the sake of time saving and efficiency, I have taken the liberty of doing a few things here, which I will quickly explain so that you will understand. So fundamentally what I've really done is the basic retouching, okay? And I will show you the retouches, roughly, quickly speaking. So my concern was, with all these lines and all of this that was showing in the cap and towards the top of the bottle. This is the plastic wrapping around the lid so that it stays untouched. So what I've done is a bit of retouching to smooth out the lines and so on and so forth. In the retouching, I've also used a little bit of painting with a brush over here just to sort of blend it with something in mind. So if you notice, these lines have been taken care of. So this is partly done through cloning and partly done through taking a sample of this color and using a paintbrush with blend mode set to color. And that's about it. Okay. Then what I have done is, notice here's a layer which says paint color on lid. So this is what I was referring to. So I've taken this tone and I've painted the whole thing over. I've left it to normal and modified my opacity a little bit. So I'm going to leave it to about 85, somewhere in there. So a little bit of what was in the photograph is still visible, but it still doesn't look quite right. Okay, so at which point in time what I have done is I took this layer first, which was a desaturate layer. No, I apologize. I did a brightening layer through curves. So I applied a curve because I wanted it to be brighter and gradually brighter. And then I wanted to desaturate it a little bit. So if you notice, it kind of grades itself from a slightly richer grayish blue tone to a nice clean white tone. And then I said, hey, I have done that. So where I have done the retouches, I need to desaturate the top part as well. So I applied it just above the base layer a little bit. And this is currently at 100%. I'm going to reduce it to about 60 or 70%, just so that it kind of looks clean. Okay. And after having done that, I wanted to do just one more level of brightening overall on the bottle's cap, just so that it looks, because it's at the top, the light is coming from the top. I wanted the top to be brighter, and I want to lower the overall opacity of this thing to about 74-75%. So realistically speaking, all of these 4 layers really are nothing but the lid. So what I'm going to do is group them and call it lid retouch, just so that I remember it, nothing beyond that. Now, after having done this, I also took the liberty of creating a couple of paths. So here's a path for the lid, which allowed me to paint and everything else and put a mask on it. And then second one, I created a path around the bottle. So if I shared this path, this is the path that I've created around the bottle. I just wanted to make sure that I had it done. Now what I want to do is, I'm going to start with the basic as I had demonstrated. So I wish to create a path around the black spaces on the leaf. So I will take the pen tool, hitting P on the keyboard. Okay. Once I've hit P on the keyboard, then all I want is really, I want to take all of this and enhance it a little bit, any black spaces. So I'm going to draw a quick path around. And for the sake of convenience, I will speed up this video part so that we all do not waste too much time. Okay, now that my path is done, and I'll explain what my rationale is for what I am doing here, is I'm going to call it silver leaf. What I was looking for was solid blacks, or more or less where there's a solid color. Don't want to eliminate all the light grays, otherwise it'll start to look very, very flat. So I've now effectively created in one layer all the aspects of the leaf, and I've got it called silver leaf. Now, while this is selected, I go into my flyout menu and I say make selection, and I'm going to give it about 2 pixels of feathering, because any more and things may not notice at 2 pixels. This has kind of eliminated itself from here, and neither is this picking up, and I'm not too concerned about it because I'm going to leave it the way it is. I go into layers, I go into my topmost lid retouch, and then I click on new. So there's a layer that is created above that. I'm going to call it silver leaf. And once I've got it, I flip the white over into the foreground, take the fill paint bucket, and simply click and invert the selection, and then paint it in there. Now, as I paint it, you will notice it looks a bit too bright. So let's reduce it down a little bit so that we get a realistic feel. The first thing that I'm going to do is change it from normal to screen, because screen will allow to show the lying texture underneath it. And then I'm going to modify the opacity until it starts to look realistic and doesn't look fake, as if somebody has done stuff to it. And then I want to enlarge it, and perhaps a little bit over here. Once having done that, you'll notice that the edges don't look too comfortable. So what I want to do is, while I'm still in this layer, I'm going to go into filter, I'm going to go into blur, take the Gaussian blur, and actually apply a blur to it. So as I apply the blur, you notice the edges start to blend, and you can see this over here. So you may want to be very careful of how much you're applying. So this is 0 or 0.1, and then I gently increment it until I kind of feel comfortable with it. I'm okay with this. Hit OK, and now modify the opacity levels a little more or not, whatever it may be. This is reasonably acceptable, and I can still see the textural detail. Now, since this is a white, what if we tried luminosity in here? Does it make a difference? Let's see. Yes, it does brighten things. Notice? So similar behavior, it'll allow you to see the texture underneath. So it's again a choice whether you want this. You cannot have color because white is really transparent. Overlay soft light will not work. So either it's going to be screen, normal, or luminosity. It's up to you. I personally like the screen mode. I'm not fixing all of this, although I could if I really wanted to. But I sort of like the slight darkness in there because it gives me a better feel to the whole place. Maybe I'm going to fix this part. So I'm going to take the pen tool and very quickly draw another path while I am here, because I might as well do this. I think it'll add some value. Let's hope so. So again, I'm not going all the way up, so I've got this selection and it's a work path. I'll keep it in a separate layer or the same layer, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to say add leaf, just so that I have a reference of what I'm doing, and then make selection. I'm going to leave it to 2 pixels, go into layers. I could stay in this layer and literally just fill in with a white. I need to invert and fill it in. So the only problem is when I do fill it in with a white, I don't have the same levels of control as I had earlier on. So if you notice from there, it didn't look quite right. So I'm going to create and add leaf. Done. And then fill it up. Oops, sorry, black, white. Once having filled it up, deselect, change the blend mode to screen, modify the opacity to suit your purposes, and again I'm going to go and apply the same Gaussian blur filter that I had done earlier on. Now, the issue that I'm having is that there's a bit of an indentation. So if you notice, you see that? So what I want to do is I'll take the erase brush, and I've taken the erase tool, and I'm taking a soft brush, maybe a little bit of hardness applied to it, and enlarge it, reduce the brush size, and I'm going to lower the opacity to about 20%, and then gently come in. I'm just working it very mildly to create that same darkness in the middle, so it maintains its sense of depth. And if we enlarge it a little bit, it looks pretty darn decent. We could continue with all of these, but you get an idea. It's up to you how far you wish to take it, okay? Now, having done this, what else do we need to do, which is worth something? It would be cool to enhance this space, for sure. So once again, I'm going to create a path around it. And again, for the sake of expediency, we're gonna speed up the video here. Now that we have the selection, so what I have done differently is I've drawn two paths simultaneously on the same space, just the way that I had done multiple paths on the silver leaf, except that I'm going to treat it slightly differently. Okay, so I take the path selection tool, which is here, and I click on this. And once I have done this, I say make selection, and I'm going to give it about 5 pixels of feathering. Hit OK. Now, I realize that what it has done is it has selected everything outside. I don't want to select the outside, because how do I know this? Because the marquee is going all the way around, which means everything is selected over here and not the inner circle. So I want to use the inner circle, or either which way. So let's say I want to invert it for the sake of convenience. So I did Command Shift I or Control Shift I on a PC, and here is my selection. Okay, so I clicked outside to deselect the path. Now, what I wish to do is add to this. So I select on this guy, the next one, and once again, I can go in here to the flyout and say make selection. And what I wish to do is add to selection. Okay, so this is the current selection. I want to add to selection. If I add to selection, notice once again it has selected the outside. So if I do invert, now it is just the inner circle that has been selected. So if you don't get it, that's okay. You can do it the way that we had talked about in class. So now I want to add a new layer while the selection is active, and I click on the name, and I wish to call it indentation. So now that I have added the indentation, just for the sake of my own peace of mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the selection so that I can easily recall it later on, as opposed to trying to create it every single time. And it has been saved. So if I go look into my channels, this is an alpha channel selection which has been saved, so not a problem. So we revert back to the layers. My indentation layer is there. And then I want to pay attention to what the behavior is. So notice there's a transitional point in the lighter tone from the lighter tone to the darker tone. Okay, so you have variable options. Why I did this is because this is a kind of a elliptical form. So what I want to do is take a gradient which is elliptical. So I take a gradient, and this time I have to choose a gradient which is white to black. So here I have a white to black, and I want a radial gradient, because what I want is I want this part to be white, gently curving up and then turning to black. So let's see what happens, and we can always fix it anytime we want. So I've left everything to normal. We're getting there. So it's a bit of a learning curve of where you draw the gradient from. A little bit more. I am kind of happy with that. So now that we have the gradient, I make the selection disappear by doing Control or Command D. Make sure my path is not selected. So once I have this, then I can modify the behavior over here. Okay, so I could say multiply, which will darken everything. I could say screen, which will leave alone the gray on the right side as it was. Or if I put in luminosity, hey, luminosity works pretty darn well this time around. So do you notice the difference? Switching the layer off and on. And once again, I do want to blur it slightly, because the reason is the edges are a little on the sharp side. So I wish to see the edges to be blurred so that it blends in quite well. So I'm actually happy with that. Hit OK, it's about 6.4 pixels, and then modify my opacity levels to whatever extent that I want, and seems pretty darn decent. So suddenly there's a whole lot of shape that has appeared in here. So let's take a peek. Reduce the size, and you can tell that there's distinct indentation that is going on. So this is done. I hope this is making some sense. Next stage. Okay, well, this is fun. No, it is not fun. It's painful. Now we wish to make a selection for all the blues and save that selection. So I'm going to take my move tool, come back to the base, and I go into select. Once I come into select, I choose color range, and once I choose color range, I am interested in picking on just the blues primarily. Okay, now to make life a little bit easier, I'm gonna say, hey, show me a black mat. So now it covers up everything other than the blues. Okay, or you could say a white mask. It's up to you what works for you. Okay, or I could say a grayscale. I kind of like the grayscale better, because this gives me a greater sense of clarity, and I can actually start to pick on specific regions. So I pick on just the blues. So I'm getting precision results. So there's other stuff that is happening. I'm not too bothered by it. I will resolve it soon enough. So I pick on all these blues. I'm going to clear that up. Not a big deal. This I can fix later. I want to clean this up. And this is again quite cleanable at a later stage as well. So I'm clicking with the plus icon associated with the whole thing. And here, this is a little on the dull side because it's part of the highlight region. So that's one of the reasons why it is doing what it is doing. Okay. Now that I have this reasonable selection over here, I also notice that there's a whole lot of other spaces that have been selected. So what if I modify my range and my fuzziness here? Let's see what happens. If I reduce my range, do you notice that a bunch of stuff starts to go dark again, so I am missing out on this selection, so I may come back and add it a little more to further refine everything. That doesn't look too shabby, and we're going to clean up this selection very shortly as well. What if I modify my fuzziness? So as I lower the fuzziness, it increases the local contrast, and it actually cleans up my selection quite well. Now, this is just a basic rough selection. Please do understand that, okay? So I'm going to hit OK, and now I have all the marching ants in here. So I am going to immediately, before I lose everything, come and select and say Save Selection. And I'm going to give it blue pattern. Done. Now I deselect it. So I have created a channel, and I wish to now clean it up. So the immediate thing that I'm going to do, make sure bring black on the foreground, take the brush tool, and I'm going to enlarge it with not a whole lot of feathering, because I want to do very quick and dirty fixing over here. So I'm going to get rid of all the white spaces that are showing. Now I'm going to be careful not to get too close to the bottle for now, and you can modulate the brush size any which way you want for your convenience. So I'm staying away from the edges. You notice that? Because we're going to do refining of the mask over there. So all I want is just the blue pattern to be highlighted with white. Everything else needs to be dark. Now I've done the larger selection. Okay, you notice that. I want to do the lid, so I'm not bothered with the lid. I simply come in and paint it black. Now there's certain small spaces left in here, so I may choose a slightly smaller brush to go through the middle, and I'm going to stay away from the pattern for the time being. Okay? And just basically rough edits. And I want to get rid of that. And the same thing will be done over here. So I'm doing the outside first, and then come and just scrub the middle part. Now, if you notice, majority of the space is pretty darn black. Okay. What I wish to do is the following. I'm going to enlarge it a little bit, just so that I can see better, and get rid of this as much as I can without really climbing into the pattern part. Okay, so I've got this part. Now what I wish to do is I wish to modify the blend mode for the brush. Okay, so if I change it from normal to overlay, okay, and watch what happens. So there's a nice clean white. So I'm going to keep a large brush, and I click in here. So what it has done is it has darkened the blacks, but it has left the whites alone. So there's some influence for the whites as well, which we will shortly resolve. So again, over here, I want to be careful. So I want to flip it over to white first, and actually apply the white first so that it cleans up the white. And same idea over here, and then flip it to black, and then repaint on top of it. So it's a kind of a back and forth process, which will allow you to create fairly precise selections. So I'm using a keyboard shortcut to flip the black and white, and it's not a bad idea for you to know the shortcut on keyboard when you're if you want to revert from, if you had other colors, if you hit D on the keyboard, it'll revert to its default of white and black. If you want to swap the white and the black with the foreground, so whichever color is in the foreground is the dominant color. So I want the black in the foreground, so I hit X on the keyboard and it cycles through. That's all that you really need to care about. So once again, so what I'm going to do is, as opposed to using the black, I'm going to flip it to white and a slightly smaller brush, and just make sure my whites are clean and nice and sharp along the edges. So notice the edges also outside becomes a little gray. I'm not too concerned with this because we're going to fix that very shortly. So all I'm doing is just trying to get as much of white cleaned up as possible. This is something akin to a refining your mask, but not quite. This is also refinement, but of a different nature. Okay, so I've got reasonable whites, and now I'll flip it over to black and go over it again. So as I go over it, the edges become sharper, the whites stay the way they are, and the blacks get darkened. So in some cases you may get a little bit of black coming through on the actual pattern, which is okay because you have the ability to clean it up later, like over here what's happening. So we'll go and clean it shortly. I would like to believe this looks pretty darn respectable in terms of a basic selection, and it's done a very, very decent job. Now if we activate our image and leave the selection on, you can see in some spaces where we don't really quite have the right selection, for example over here. So basically I've got the blue pattern on, okay, and the RGB layer on. I have activated the pattern, the alpha channel, and that the RGB layer, but make sure that this layer is active, the selection layer, the alpha channel. Then using white, because this is all white, I have enlarged the image, and again choosing different sizes of the brush, I am literally now cleaning up all the selection. Okay, and you can flip through the white and black to fill in other areas. So this is literally like working with a quick mask. Okay, now that we have cleaned up most of the stuff in here, a piece of advice and a quick and dirty trick. This is primarily what our selection is, okay? The quick mask shows you the selection. So what we really wish to do is, we can do it two ways. We can either, actually no, let's do it one way and keeping it simple. So I get out of here, I come to my RGB layers, and right here, all I'm interested in is enhancing the blues. Okay, I have a selection ready, so I can go into select, I say load selection, and what I'm looking for is the blue pattern. Then I hit OK. So now wherever we had created that selection, it has created a marquee around it. What you will notice is that the marquee is currently at 0 feathering, which basically is going to create very harsh outlines along, and the changes that we make may not happen as smoothly transitionally as we would like them to be. So what I'm going to do is, while my marquee is active, I go into select and I say modify, And when I say modify, I'm going to choose feather. And all I wish to do is maybe give it 2 pixels of feathering. That's all. And if I do 2 pixels of feathering, what I've done is I've just rounded the edges a little bit by 2 pixels. That's all. Once having done that, I reduce the image size. And now this is the question. So at what level should we be doing this color adjustment? Now, does the selection incorporate anything that we have retouched? Absolutely, yes. There's some retouching that I've done in the blues as well. So I want to be on the topmost layer. Okay. And I want to do an adjustment here. So which adjustment would be an appropriate adjustment is the question. I could do a color balance or hue saturation, okay, or even curves, whatever I want. Let me show you the differences. So if I do a curves adjustment, curves creates a layer mask over here. So now if we enlarge it, remember the 2 pixels of feathering? So notice that the edges are not that sharp, so they'll blend better when I do the adjustments over here. Okay, I just wanted you guys to see this. So I've got the curves. So let's see. I want to, basically what do I want? I want to enhance the tones in the blues. So I'm going to darken some of it and I'm going to brighten some of it. So what I'm really doing is I'm trying to push the contrast in here. Okay, that's number one. The other thing I could do is I could go into the blues by itself and modify the behavior of the blues. Do you see the changes? So as I take it up in the midtones, it brightens itself. As I take it down, it darkens itself. So I'm just gently pushing it up. That's about all that I'm really doing, number one. Number two, once I've done this, what if I modify the blend mode to it? Let's see what happens if I go to multiply. Whoa, it gets too dark. What if I say darker color? Does it make a difference? Subtle, right? And what if I say overlay or soft light? It pushes the contrast a little more. What if I say luminosity? Not a whole lot. Color? Yes, it does make a difference. So again, variable choices, what you wish to do. I mean, I could keep it to multiply and lower the opacity levels, but the blues become too dark. So that's maybe not the best choice. Or I could just leave it to normal at 100% and then let it be. At the same time, if I don't use this, so you can see the difference, right? If I'm in this layer, topmost, and I decide, hey, I'll just use common sense and use hue saturation. So if I have hue saturation available now, notice it's here. I'm going to take the interactive tool and I want to click on certain regions of the image. So I'm going to pick on the majority blue region. And what do I wish to do? I want to saturate it. Do you see the changes? Overall, and it's telling me that it's picked on the blue tones. Now, you can always do things manually as well. You could just go into master, but it's only going to impact right now. I have not created a selection, so it's going to impact everything. So you notice the change? It happens globally, but that's okay. We're going to resolve that. I can change the tonal range of the blues that I want to whatever heck I want, right? So I am modifying that and lightening it overall, the blues. Maybe not that much. That's good enough. Now, what it has done is it has influenced the entire image. So I wish to apply that selection on this particular layer. So while I'm here, I go into select, I again say load selection, and I want to take the blue pattern, hit OK. Now the selection is once again active. So I want to leave the selected areas as white, but I want everything else to be black. So I can invert this. Okay, the selection, and all I did was Command Shift I or Control Shift I, or you could go into the select menu and say inverse over here in the menus. Now that I have the selection, I'm going to bring black in the foreground, take my paint bucket and fill it. Guess what I've done? Exactly the same thing that I had done with the earlier layer. So this is what my layer looks like. And we can do a comparative as to what the changes or differences are. here you see the enhanced blues, and then with the curves, pretty similar, slightly different. The hue saturation has made it slightly richer, and we could always use a combination of the two. So if I'm going to be using the combination, I'm going to make sure that I don't have the blue making any changes. So I'm going to get rid of that, because otherwise it may become excessive, and now I can work on it. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. The blues have been enhanced. So this is how far I'm really expecting you folks to go. Now, having said that, what if we went beyond this? Okay, so remember I had created a selection for the backdrop, the bottle actually. So allow me to demonstrate what can be done. So we have done most of our adjustments, right? So what I want to do is make sure that I understand what these are for. So I'm going to call it blue contrast, and here blue saturation, just so that I have references to everything that I have done, right? And I could group it as one. Indentation is, I don't want to bother with that. Add leaf, silver leaf. So I could say, I could group these together and call highlight and shadow retouches. Let's do that. Highlight plus shadow retouch. That's one. This was the lid retouch. This is blue fix. So I have everything named. Here, this is the only thing that I have not bothered with as yet. Okay, so please bear with me. I go into paths. I have the bottle path available, right? I go and I say make selection, and I'm going to give it a feathering of, let's say, 3 pixels. Hit OK. So once again, it has picked on the outside. I'm going to invert it. Okay, I come in here, and this is my original layer. So if I now decide that, hey, I want to remove the background and strip the bottle away and add another background, I can easily and comfortably do that. So while I'm in here, I come to my base layer, and I can simply add a layer mask. So what it has done is it has stripped away the background in its entirety. Okay, now I could do it this way and add whatever backdrop that I want, or I could still utilize the existing background, modify the color and tone and whatever the heck I want. To be able to do that, now I'm going to duplicate this layer. Okay, this is where the bottle is. This is where my background will be. So just to show you, if I invert this mask, Command I inverts it. Basically, this is now hiding the bottle and showing everything else. I hope this is making some sense. So I have 2 distinct layers doing 2 different things. So I'm going to name it bottle background. So while I'm in the background layer, I can modify it to whatever the heck I want. Make sure you're clicked on the image. So just to share, I'm going to invert the layer. This is what happens. So do you see what I mean? So if this is the layer that I wish to have an impact on, I can now create an additional layer on top of it, add a color to it, and see where it goes. So what if I were to add a gradient? I need to take the gradient, and I'm going to create, I don't know, since it's a blue one, what if I were to take a blue to black or something like that? So I've got a blue to black gradient, and I wish to apply it from here to here. So the blue will be on the, radial. Hey, not a bad idea. What if I apply it like this? There, right? Except it doesn't look quite right because the bottle is now floating in midair. But what if I change it from normal to something else? So what if I change it to color? Ah, that's pretty interesting. Or luminosity, no, color, or maybe soft light and hard light may work better. Okay, it's not influencing anything other than the layer directly beneath it. Please do understand this. Okay, so this is one of the ways. I mean, I could add another color on top of it and make it do other things. For example, I could take this, I take another gradient, and just to be completely ridiculous, maybe, so please be patient with me, I take this guy. And here I'm going to modify it. So I'm going to leave it to red, but over here I'm going to change it to white and change the opacity to 0. Okay, add it to my library, hit OK, and now this time I'm going to keep it linear, reduce the image a little bit, and it's a brand new layer. So what I want to do is apply it around here. So you notice what's going on? So this red, I can push it down and the behavior will be gone because it's beneath this black one. If I push it up, then I can change its behavior and it can do different things. So I just change it to multiply and it behaves very differently. The same way that we could eliminate this white foreground, the surface that the bottle is sitting on, and change it to whatever the heck we want, and so on and so forth. But I digress, so please forgive me. What I want to do now is add a couple of highlights over here and maybe a very faint edge highlight as if it was done in lighting. So here there's a decent highlight. I want to add an edge highlight along here. Okay, so I'm going to take my pen tool and starting here, I'm going to do a quick and dirty path. I would like to think that I've got the path reasonably okay. So I'm going to get rid of all of this so we come back to the original file. This was more for your demonstrational purposes. And here I have a path and I'm going to call it left highlight. There we go. Now that I have the path left highlight all done, I'm going to make a selection from here. So this time around, once again, I'm going to give it at least 5 pixels of feathering so that my edges are nice and soft. Once I have the selection going, I can then, once again, since I've done all the fixing, I want the highlight right at the top. So I'm going to create a new layer and I'm calling it left highlight. Okay. Now that I've got the left highlight going, I have multiple options. I can either fill the whole thing with a white and then change the blend mode, or I could put a gradient which is white to transparent. We can create one. So I've already got one and I'm going to apply this along here and make sure it's linear in a blank layer, completely editable, so I'm not going to sweat it. That doesn't look too bad, does it? And we can go and fix it. Okay, so I'm gonna undo it for a minute and start a little outside and extend it a little more so there's a bit of transparency available. That's okay. now that I have this as a selection available to me, we have now, based on this selection, drawn a gradient. Okay, so when you carefully look at it, there are a few issues over here. The edge is showing through, maybe it's bleeding over. Yeah, it's bleeding over a tiny bit, and all those wonderful things that shouldn't really be happening. Okay, but it looks pretty decent to begin with. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to start with changing the blend mode. So I'm going to apply a screen blend mode. Okay, and I'm going to modify the opacity over here because I want to be realistic. Now, in this case, you can change the behavior of this white by simply changing the blend mode to overlay or soft light. So notice how it becomes darker in the white regions, and in the colored regions you don't even see it. So luminosity works kind of, or screen and luminosity work pretty similarly to each other. So I'm going to leave it to screen. Now the issue is the slight bleed that I have. So the simplest solution I can come up with is take the erase tool, and I want to keep it somewhat sort of midway in here, and bring it along the edge and just gently at 100%. And very carefully notice how it's eliminating the edge, so you got to be careful. Now while you're doing it by hand, it just hit me that I'm not the smartest individual. We can do it in a fairly easier manner. Okay, so if I were, because there are tools available for God's sake, so if I take the magic wand tool, okay, and doesn't matter what the tolerance or average is, I simply click on the outside. So notice it has created a selection. Now very easily I go into select, I say modify, and I say expand. Expanded by what, 3 pixels or 5 pixels, something like that. 5 pixels, number one. Number two, I want it to be soft, so I'm going to go modify and I say feather, and I'm going to add another 5 pixels of feathering. And now that I have that, and I want to enlarge it so that you can see exactly what's going on and how it behaves, I'm going to increase the opacity. I'm going to change it to normal so that you can actually appreciate what goes on. So notice in here, I hit delete once, I hit delete again, and I keep hitting it. And what it's doing is creating, it's erasing the edge very, very slightly. So I'm okay with this. Now, last thing, I'm going to go add a blur to the whole thing so that the edges are nice and smooth, which is brilliant. It works. You can add more or less, whatever that works for you. So just don't go nuts on it, okay? I'm kind of happy with about 7. Change it back to screen and modify the opacity levels so that it looks realistic. So I think that looks pretty okay. I don't know, but to me it looks fairly reasonable, as if there's a nice broad reflector on the left side or something of that nature. And that's about it. Basically, that's the objective. So if I were to go through the various stages of the image's his life span, let's see. This is where we arrived with the raw process. Okay, and I'm not going to bother with how it should be. I'm just going to switch on one layer at a time. So this is simply eliminating the blue cast over here. Then I did the retouches, so I've gotten rid of the little things that were happening over here. Then additional retouch on the lid, so you can see highlight shadow retouches. So it's basically the indentation that I have worked with, and the blue fix, so I've made the blue richer. And the whole point of creating a group is that if I think that this blue is not correct or too rich, I can simply reduce the opacity on the entire group in one go. Okay, so, and then finally that little highlight which makes it come alive. I hope this was not too complicated, and I apologize if I digressed from the original approach of just doing X amount of stuff. And basically that's it. Enjoy.